Tonight, for the first time, a former senior military intelligence officer comes forward to say what we've only imagined is true.
You are saying to the human race, for the first time, we are not alone.
We're definitely not alone.
Claims that our government has proof of alien life.
We have spacecraft from another species.
We do, yeah.
How many?
Quite a number. Some are landed, some are crashed.
Roswell may not have been the first event, and well known. I mean, there's been some reporting internationally as well that there have been some crashed vehicles, and they were obtained by local authorities, and there was some scientific study done on them. I want to be very careful not to go too far down the rabbit hole, but I've seen personally some documentation that's very compelling from a particular foreign country where they had a recovery of a vehicle, and they had some countries conducting scientific analysis on it. And after World War II, allegedly, parts of that vehicle were brought to the United States.
Yeah. I think I know what country that was. It was in South America.
It's Italy. Italy.
Yeah, it was Italy.
Yeah, that's as it was explained to me. I saw some documentation. Look, I don't want to get too much into the conspiracy side of the house. There is some documentation that has been validated that was from Mussolini himself. It's authentic. It's been proven to be authentic, the documentation.
So let's start from the very beginning. You say it's a 90-year cover-up.
Just about, yeah.
90 years?
1933 was the first recovery in Europe, in Magenta, Italy. They recovered a partially intact vehicle.
It's long been known that the regime of dictator Benito Mussolini documented numerous UAP during this time. This internal memo from the Italian secret services includes crude drawings of the UAPs. It's true, it's real.
Yeah, that actually happened. The Italian government moved it to a secure air base in Italy for the rest of kind of the fascist regime until 1944, 1945, and the Pope Pius XII back-channeled that.
So the Vatican was involved?
Yeah, and told the Americans what the Italians had, and we ended up scooping it.
Northern Italy, 1933. With the threat of war casting an ominous shadow across Europe, an incredible series of events unfolds, all under the supervision of one of history's most powerful and feared leaders, Benito Mussolini.
In 1933, it's claimed that a UFO crashed in the Lombardy region of Italy. This was apparently an object around 50 feet in diameter, like two saucers joined together. It was described as being grayish in color and metallic. And apparently it was then taken by the military and studied on the personal orders of the then dictator Benito Mussolini.
According to some accounts, the UFO crashed near the city of Magenta, just 80 miles northeast of Mount Musone. The craft was found to be unoccupied, and unlocking its secrets became a top priority.
This flying saucer was something that the Mussolini government took a lot of interest in. And so there was an establishment of a group of experts to study this phenomenon, to study exactly what it involved, who made it. And this committee was called RS-33.
To lead the committee, it is said that Mussolini enlisted the noted engineer and famed inventor of the radio, Guglielmo Marconi.
Mussolini said, find out what it is, and because it seems to be so advanced, build one. And Marconi apparently said, well, we can't figure it out. There is a technology here over and above anything we possess. And that only left the conclusion that this, for want of a better term, was an extraterrestrial spacecraft.
Was a crashed extraterrestrial craft really recovered by the Italian government in 1933?
Anyway, we're talking about the nuts and bolts, the national security parts of it. And I understand that. And in your book and in a lot of these interviews you've done, you talk about how you want to be forward looking. So obviously, like Dave Grusch is talking about a craft being recovered from Italy in 1933, right? So
everything began when I received by post a letter containing different documents. These documents were contained, and we are speaking of original documents, not photocopies. These documents were contained in a sheet, which is like this, you see, in the hands of His Excellency Galeazzo Ciano. Who was Galeazzo Ciano? Galeazzo Ciano was Mussolini's son-in-law, and also the foreign affairs minister of Italy. And in this envelope, we had a complete report of a UFO sightings occurred in 1936. Over the town of Venice and Mestre. And in different pages, there was everything reported. What I may show you here is, for instance, a page of this report. And you see, we have also the drawing of the object like it was seen. An elongated big object with portholes or something like that, emitting two smaller objects. They were saucer-shaped, as you see. This is a complete report made by Italian authorities. So we had the problem to verify if this could have been possible, and we discovered absolutely that it could be possible. Consider that these objects they tried to intercept them with planes, biplanes, of course, you imagine, and it was useless. But apart from that, the report says also that there were also other cases 2 years before. And all this story, to be brief, reports that the Italian government created a study group, in order to study these reports, because Mussolini thought that these objects could be a new weapon of another European country, France, England, or Germany, of course. And so they created a group called Cabinet RS-33. RS stands for Ricerche Speciali, Special Researchers. And 33 has nothing to do with a year, like we thought originally. No, it is only a code having to do with new inventions and technologies. And this is because this scientific team had the purpose to study the problem from the standpoint of reverse engineering, in other words. Well, then other reports mention that in 1933 one of these objects had a crash landing and in Italy, not far from Magenta, near Milan, in northern Italy.
There is recently, and I think I know why this story is sort of in play, is that when David Grusch came forward to Ross Coulthart and eventually spoke or testified under oath to a House Senate subcommittee, subcommittee, he mentioned, I believe, a possible event that occurred back in 1933, well predating the Roswell event. And I think there's been a little bit of coverage of that. I think the information that is available is highly limited, so it certainly hasn't been established to my satisfaction. But part of the story is that there eventually this vehicle that might have been attained during the time of Mussolini was essentially eventually gotten to the United States with the assistance of the Catholic Church. But as far as I know, the evidence for that is still paltry, and that a lot of investigation is going to be done before we know for sure what's happening. And frankly, I don't think there's any chance we'll have confirmation of that story until after we get formal disclosure of the extraterrestrial presence and the files start getting brought forward as is intended under the bills that are being submitted to the United States Senate.
Interesting case, and then of course Pope Pius XII and the Vatican were involved, back-channeling it through the OSS, which became the CIA later.
So this 33 one you said was in Italy?
Yeah, Magenta. So it's, I'm bad at geography. I think that's like a Lombardy region. It's like northwest Italy.
And what's the story behind it?
So basically it looked like it crashed, right? The original shape most likely was like a lenticular disc-like craft, with like two dinner plates.
What
right?
does lenticular mean?
So like two dinner plates, smushed together, right? A hump, and there's like a, like a bubble on top.
Like the classic,
like
saucer.
Like that.
Like that. Okay.
But it looks like when it hit, the edges broke off, so it became this like bell or acorn shaped thing. And there was nothing in it. It was like just an artifact. There was no biological remnants, if you will. So it's so funny because the Italians were so confused, they actually called up the Germans and they were like, is this one of your Wunderwaffe? Like, what the hell just crashed in northern Italy? Mussolini, and this is all publicly available information because some Italian researchers found all these original documents that some people were sitting on for years in Italy. They put a gag order on the press, etc. And Mussolini asked the Germans to come down. And of course, the Germans came down and they were like, that is not ours, but let's look at it together. So that's kind of perhaps a tertiary reason the kind of Axis powers got together. I'm not saying that's like the reason, but I think the Italians and the Germans were so intrigued with what they found from like an artifact perspective. There was at least some scientific and military collaboration during the war, the details of which I'm not sure of, but I know people that know that specific event that are currently still intel officers within this program in detail. But
so was there witnesses to the crash or some sort of an understanding that something had crash landed and then they discovered it?
Yeah, I forget the precise discovery. I don't know if it was like local police officers or local farmers found it in the field, something like that. I don't want to misspeak. I assume some of the Italian researchers might have some fact witnesses that can orally say, oh yeah, my great-grandfather found it or something like that, but I don't remember.
And what was the scale of this vehicle?
It was probably like 20 feet by 10 feet, something like that. Not super huge, but kind of big.
Do they think that this was a drone? Do they think that this was occupied?
There was nothing in it, so if it was piloted, if you will, by some sentience, I mean, your guess is as good as mine.
So what happened to that vehicle?
So we knew where it was being stored at a particular location after the crash, and then the military came in and we grabbed it towards the end of the war, 1944, 1945, because, like I said, Pope Pius XII already kind of let FDR know.
Why'd the Pope get involved? Because it's in Italy?
Well, interestingly enough, there's like a whole history of human intelligence prior to World War II and old money, the Vatican, the Italian mob, kind of the old country boys did a lot of informal intelligence collection for the U.S. And there's probably some books you can read on it, but it's really interesting. Human intelligence collection wasn't really formalized until the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, which became the CIA in 1947. You had Paul Mellon and all these other affluent guys of all these old money families that basically created the CIA. So that's probably the reason why.
So this thing that was recovered, this was the first documented one that the United States had access to?
I can't get into if it was the first or not, but it was an early one.
Very early.
Yeah.
So it's almost 100 years ago.
Yes.
And so they take this thing and then they bring it where?
Yeah, I can't get into those.
Can't get into that.
No.
Okay. So they bring it somewhere in the United States. And was the attempt to try to back engineer this thing? Was the attempt to try to understand what it was?
Yeah, I mean, first of it, obviously, it's understanding the situation, right? What do we have our hands on? And like I've said in some other videos and stuff, that we took the Manhattan Project secrecy and overlaid it on this issue because that secrecy worked well for atomic bomb developments and whatnots. And certainly this whole program in a nutshell, if I were to summarize the 90 plus years of history, it is a reverse engineering program to garner some kind of insight. And of course, not a lot of the things that we've learned from it are directly, ripped off the technology we found, but it has inspired other innovations that made its way into other U.S. classified programs over the year for national defense reasons, and it's a myriad of different things.
And I want to chat to you, Graham, as a historian, a researcher, an author, about a crash that happened in 1933. Now, this was a claim that came up from David Grusch, the whistleblower, in his recent interview with Ross Coulter on News Nation. For some, you might not know this isn't a new claim. For others who may be aware of this wasn't brand new information, but it was information fed to the masses for the first time for many. So this 1933 crash came to light when Ross Coulter asked him, David Grusch, about his cover-up going back 90 years rather than the usual 75 to 80, Graham. And he mentioned that this crash happened in Italy, 1933. So what was your thoughts on hearing that at first?
Well, that's just so sorry about the motorbike in the background. This is where the village I live in is a bit of a mecca for bikers. So we'll go back actually to April 11th, 1933, and this is when this crash is supposed to have happened. And a flying saucer, or call it what you will, was supposed to have either crashed or landed. It's a bit sort of vague, near a town called Magenta, which is just to the west of Milan. It's actually now on the western outskirts of Milan, in northern Italy. And this is obviously 14 years before Roswell and Kenneth Arnold, so it's quite early on. Now there had been allegedly some reports of various they called them mystery aircraft back then, and they were seen all over Europe. It was kind of modern, it was the Foo Fighters of the time, it was the ghost rockets of the time, it was the flying saucers of the time, and that's what they called them. Now this particular case is supposed to have generated reports or the setting up of a special unit called Gabinetto RS-33. RS is Italian for Ricerche Speciali, or special researchers, and 33 was supposed to mean the year. And this special group was supposed to have investigated, been set up by Benito Mussolini to study what this was, what this particular crash was, and what was found there. And whatever was discovered, again, as this legend has basically grown up around, suggests that whatever this vehicle was, it was taken to the Sire Marchetti aircraft factory in a place called Viaggiati, which is about 20 kilometers north of Magenta. So again, it's on the outskirts of Milan. Now, again, as I keep saying, as the legend says, because a lot of this hasn't really been verified. According to this legend, Mussolini reckoned that this flying saucer, call it what you will, was either French or British or a German, secret airplane or some kind of secret weapon.
Coming now to the subject that has raised quite a bit of interest here in Italy, that is the so-called Mussolini UFO case. Confirmed before, you mentioned it also by Lue Elizondo. Could you please elaborate on the way you got to know the event, its characteristics, and so on?
Yes, some of my interview subjects that I
ultimately directed to the Inspector General. They did give me a briefing on all the U.S. involved recoveries that happened over the years, and the Mussolini case that, interestingly enough, is already out there in public vernacular thanks to your work uncovering that case. And the 1933 Magenta area crash was one of the events that they talked about, and that was one that I submitted in my DoD and pre-publication review to be able to talk about publicly, because I thought that was a very remarkable international case that would hopefully spur not just U.S. interest, but European interest. And so what's interesting about that crash, this is some stuff I haven't stated publicly, but I did submit it for security review. But so when it came down, when they went to recover it, it had a acorn or bell shaped, but what really happened there is they believe that the original craft was lenticular or saucer, because when it crashed, when they came to recover it, all the edges were broken off around the craft. And so it looked like a bell or an acorn, but really it had additional characteristics that were destroyed when it landed. But Pope Pius XII was involved, and he sent a communique through the OSS, the American OSS, and it ended up going to FDR's desk. But as far as I know, unless the records were destroyed, the Vatican and the Pope Pius XII section of the Vatican Secret Archives, there should be documented evidence. From what I was told, now these intel officers that briefed me on this, that had firsthand knowledge, they assumed that the Vatican still had those records and they weren't destroyed, and they postulated if they did, what specific Pope's records it would have been in, because of the time and Pius XII's involvement back then. And of course, that was ultimately recovered at the end of the war, and went under U.S. possession after the war.
Yesterday, it broke that David Grusch was interviewed by Le Parisien, which is a French daily newspaper covering both international and national news and local news of Paris. I'm just going to go ahead and give you the bombshell that he shared. Interviewer: can we know more about where these quote-unquote ships were recovered? David Grusch: one was recovered in Italy in 1933, which is the earliest case I've been briefed on. I can't talk about the others. Interviewer: what allegedly happened there? David Grusch: in 1933, a bell-like craft around 10 meters in size was recovered in Magenta, northern Italy. It was kept by Mussolini's government until 1944, when it was recovered by agents of the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, a former U.S. intelligence agency. Ironically, it predates anything the public has heard about for decades, such as Roswell, etc. I was authorized to talk about it by the Department of Defense's Office of Pre-Publication and Security Review.
That it was recovered and deeply studied, of course. This group, the Cabinet RS-33, was directed by Guglielmo Marconi, because Guglielmo Marconi was not only the inventor of radio and the Nobel Prize, but at that time he was the president of the Royal Academy of Science of Italy. So it was involved for this. And other people were part of this team, normally engineers, astronomers, and so on. Well, to tell you like things were, we had this material after we started them, and so that really everything was possible. We had to make forensic analysis, and so the objects proved to be really old reports created.
Roberto, when you say forensic analysis, are you saying that you analyzed some materials
Yeah,
from
no,
the
we
object?
we did this, of course. We had we gave the documents to a forensic expert in the Tribunal of Como, and he did the analysis. Of course, he examined the paper, and he has also to ruin some of the documents because he had to verify if the ink, for instance, was really old, like the paper and so on. And the result that really all this was written in the 30s, no problem at all. What is interesting is that, well, this forensic analysis was obviously important. But now, apart from what this mysterious sender sent us, and we suspect that in spite of the fact that he did not reveal us his identity, and probably today we think that he is dead, because today he would have to be more than 90, so it's very hard. Probably he had to do with the family of Galeazzo Ciano. And Galeazzo Ciano, by the way, considered that he was Mussolini's, as I told you, son-in-law. He voted against Mussolini in 1943, and this caused the crisis of the fascist regime. The effect was that, they killed him. But apart from that, you understand, probably he had documents, and these documents are now available. But what is interesting is that now we found other documents, and these documents were given us before his death by an Italian premier, Senator Giulio Andreotti. And these documents mention all of them this cabinet RS-33. Also, they say where this cabinet has its experiments. That was a mountain not far from Rome, Mount Sorate, which it was something like Cheyenne Mountain in the USA, because it was an excavated mountain, and inside it there were many researches made, you understand. So now we have something historical in our hands, and this is extremely important. Now, no more than 3 weeks ago, we had an incredible surprise. This year, we have the 150 years of the date of the birth of Guglielmo Marconi. Incredible, but Marconi's nephew was interviewed by General Press in Italy, and a journalist asked him, "Oh, by the way, but someone says that your grandfather had to do with a research team about UFOs. What do you think about that?" And he answered, "Obviously, it was like this." Yes, exactly. The cabinet RS-33. So he confirmed everything, you understand? Incredible. And this has nothing to do, of course, with our investigation. Then there is also what David Grusch had recently told in the United States during a Congress meeting, in which he said that he could say that the first recovered UFO was an object which had crash landed in Italy in 1933, and that it was captured by American troops in 1945 and taken to the USA. And this is the story. So everything is fits to the whole story, and is also confirmed by more and more details. And this is extremely important, because this means that the UFO problem was not born in the USA in the 40s, but more or less in Europe, in Italy, in the 30s, and that this also shows another important thing. The technology was the same. So it's stupid to think that this technology may have to do with another power today. It's incredible. UFOs cannot be Russian, cannot be Chinese. Just a curiosity. You have been in the United States Air Force, so this can be your opinion. Since the object crashed in Italy was, after all, rather big, do you think that it could have been taken to the United States in an airplane or via a ship?
I don't recall that they mentioned to me how they brought it back, but if I were to speculate, based on knowledge, of B-29, B-17, C-47 aircraft back then, based on the dimensions that they described to me, it was fairly large, 10 plus meters. So I think it would have had to been a ship, most likely. It sounded too big for any U.S. transport plane that I'm aware of from World War II. That would be my pure speculation, but I don't actually know how they did it.
So Dave, can you confirm whether or not bodies were recovered from the 1933 Magenta UFO crash?
I did ask that question to my briefers, and the answer was no. They don't recall any kind of biological material coming with it. It was just an artifact that they recovered. So I'm not aware of any bodies, and they were not aware of any either.
David, finally, are you aware of the existence of other original documents, be they of Italian, American, or German origin, connected to the Italian 1933 UFO crash?
I would surmise that there's probably records in the FDR classified presidential records in America, but that was research I was never able to conduct myself. So besides that, I'm not aware of any other documentation besides, internal U.S. legacy crash retrieval, documents and other stuff that some of my interview subjects had personal access to in their U.S. government duties. Now, there were other foreign events that they actually provided the intelligence reports to me, and I personally read the reports myself and laid eyes on those documents, but those are different events, not in Western Europe.
So Dave, this is going to be the final question of this interview. Could you elaborate on the informational dimension of this UFO retrieval and reverse engineering programs, which happened in other countries, of course, as far as you can tell?
Yeah, this is an extension of what I mentioned in my initial News Nation interview about that Cold War, that arms race that has been happening behind the scenes, below the noise floor, where certainly our adversaries have their own programs and we've been competing with them, to gather all this stuff. And then B, try to make those, engineering breakthroughs that provide, weapons development, advancements for, war purposes. Very little of this technology has matriculated into, civil society and all that. So our adversaries certainly have their own programs, and even China, for example, announced that they have their own UAP task force. There was a June 2021 South China Morning Post article where China discusses they're using artificial intelligence, machine learning to evaluate UAP cases. Now, Russia hasn't made a public statement in that regard that I can think of. I mean, they certainly have made some statements in the 1990s, and you are, I'm sure, very familiar with, but as of late, I think China was the only one to make an official acknowledgement, at least that they have a task force, not necessarily anything else, but certainly with our adversaries, we've been engaged in these activities for a long time.
Okay, gentlemen. So we have finished the.
Thank you very much.